Welcome everyone. I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anna and I'm a senior marketing specialist at the University of Tartu, and today I will be your host. I am very happy to welcome you to the Alumni Talks 2023 event. And this is our new series of webinars where our fantastic alumni share their stories of studying at the University of Tartu and also give a short lecture on a topic they chose. Today with me, I have Kateryna. Kateryna graduated the master's program in innovation and technology management in 2021. She is currently pursuing her PhD in the field of process mining at the University of Tartu. She is also working as a teaching assistant. In her free time, she volunteers for or at non-profit organization and tries to attend one of her million hobbies. Kateryna was also a part of our volunteering organization called International Student Ambassadors, where she was also working as a blog manager, where our students are sharing their stories of studying at the University of Tartu and talking about their experience. Today's talk that Kateryna will be talking about will be researching and applying process mining, an innovative technology changing the way companies do business. Before I give the floor to Kateryna, I would like to mention a few technical details. So if you have any question during the webinar, please leave your questions under Q&A box. We are going to address these questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical issues, please let us know about them as soon as you can, and we will resolve them also ASAP. This webinar is also recording, so after the webinar, you're also going to receive a recording of this webinar with all of the follow-up information. Right now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Kateryna, and please, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and start your talk.
Thank you very much, Anna, for such an elaborate and warm welcome. I am sharing my screen right now, and basically you can see that Anna talked about everything that I have on my title slide, but I'm just going to reiterate a little bit. First of all, hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. To reiterate, as I said, my name is Kateryna. I am currently a PhD student and a teaching assistant at the Institute of Computer Science at the University of Tartu. I'm a 2021 graduate of Masters in Innovation and Technology Management. And today I would like to tell you about a technology called process mining, about searching and applying it. As you can see on my title slide, I call this technology the one that changes the way that companies do business. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will see why this is so, and hopefully it will spark and you can learn about it a bit more at the University of Tartu when you apply here. And so before I start telling you about the topic, a few more words. So as I said, I graduated from Innovation and Technology Management in 2021. And before that, I had completed my Bachelor in Computer Science at Taras Shevchenko National University in Kyiv. As Anna also mentioned, I was part of International Student Ambassadors here at the University of Tartu. So at the end, if you have questions, not only about process mining, but also about University of Tartu, you can write to me, to my email, because I'm quite professional at responding to them after 2 years at ISA. Another thing I put on this slide is a logo of student organization Erasmus Student Network Ukraine. A few friends and I founded it, and this is probably the thing that was also taking most of my time during studying at the University of Tartu together with ISA. That was quite a fun experience. Now, to start with, I would like to tell you a little bit about how I got here. How I got here, meaning to the University of Tartu, to the topic of process mining, and to sitting here in front of you and telling you about it. For this, we will have to travel back in time, and I will tell you my story, and then I will also put it sort of in a graphical representation so you can better imagine what I'm talking about. So we start in the year 2015. You can see me. a fresh bachelor student. You can see my university here. And in 2015, I had a mission. My mission was to get a bachelor's degree. And in order to get my bachelor's degree, I had to complete a few activities. One of such activities was taking very, as it says on the slide, probably very important courses. As you can see here, it's one of the million photos that we took with my best friend during taking these very important courses in our bachelor studies. And I was doing this activity, taking these bachelor courses for the total of 8 months while my bachelor studies were running. So this is the first step in my long journey to the University of Tartu. The next step after completing my courses at the bachelor's level was to write my bachelor's thesis. And as you can see, we're doing everything together with my best friend, including submitting our thesis. That took me about 3 months. This was another step in my journey. And after that, I had to defend my thesis, which lasted in reality 20 minutes, but felt like a lifetime. And unfortunately, I don't have any photos this day because it was very stressful. But you just know this, there is a step of me defending my bachelor thesis. And then in 2019, my mission was complete. I got my bachelor's degree. And I can also add this here to this graphical representation of my journey as this little event here, meaning that I got my bachelor's diploma. And then after that, I had a choice, basically. I had a choice between going for a job, so looking for a job, or looking for a master's. And at that point in my life, I realized that it would be better for me to continue as a master's student. So I chose looking for a master's, and then I started a long process of Googling around different universities in Europe and different master's program until I found ITM. So when I was looking for a master's program, I had a few important inputs. And one of those inputs was that I had an interest in general IT, because in my bachelor studies, I learned a lot about different parts of IT, but not too much about any of them. So I was just generally interested in IT. I had a desire to learn more about topics like management and business administration because they had sparked my interest previously, but we didn't really cover them in my bachelor's. And one other important thing was that I had no desire to code ever again because I had quite a bit of that in my bachelor's and that wasn't for me. So when I came across ITM at the University of Tartu, I read that this is a program that prepares specialists who can implement ICT solutions to management processes of enterprises, which sounded very fancy, a bit vague, but quite fancy. So after looking at it, after looking at the courses, I thought to myself, yep, that sounds just about right. And this is pretty much how I ended up in ITM. And fast forward here talking to you about it. So this was the last step in my journey to the University of Tartu, or I should say there were two possible steps, but I took the step of finding a master's program. So this is why I'm here today. And you might wonder why I put these steps as a journey in these little rectangles on the slide. Well, that's because this indeed could be seen as a process. And if you still remember the title of my presentation today, I wanted to tell you about process mining. But before talking about mining, we need to talk about processes. And so here on the slide, you can now see a very simplified version of what could be a process of how I was getting to the University of Tartu back from my bachelor studies. So I had a few activities to complete, like taking courses, writing my thesis, defending it. Then there was this receiving of my bachelor's diploma, and then I had to take a decision of what to do next. And here on the slide, you can see this little cross here. And when you come study at the University of Tartu, and you will find out that this is a BPMN notation. And this means that I had to make an exclusive choice. So I would have to either find a job or find a master's program. And so, as you know, I did go for a master's program. So this is something that can be seen, as I said, a very simplified process. And this is the basis of my whole presentation today. And if you think about it, processes are really everywhere around us. This is probably one phrase which you can hear at pretty much every presentation and every conference that talks about business process management or process mining. But it's also very true. If you look around yourself, you will find processes literally everywhere. Like on this slide, you can see examples of processes at a restaurant or at an online shop. So when you come to a restaurant and you want to have some meal there, From the perspective of the restaurant, they see the start of this process as arrival of the customer. So when you arrive to the restaurant, and then a few activities need to be completed in this process, such as the waiter has to bring you a menu, then they have to take your order, then they have to serve you a meal, and you have to pay. And then after that, when you pay, this process will be complete. Another example of a process could be at an online shop. If you, for example, want to buy a t-shirt at a clothing store online, then what happens from the perspective of the online shop is that they receive an order from you, and they have to check whether this item is available in their warehouse, for example, and they have to pack your order, they have to ship it to you, they have to collect money from you, and this could be another example of a process. Now, these two processes on this slide are, of course, oversimplified and they're just sequential. But if we talk about processes in reality, they can be very complicated and take many different turns. I will show you some examples later today, but I just wanted you to have this basic understanding of what a process is on this simple sequential example. And in fact, if we look at some activities on this process, like for example, at this online shop process, if we look at this activity package order, we can actually, here in this example, we see it as an activity to package your order. But in reality, this could easily be turned into another process if we look at how this order is being packaged, because behind that, there are also many activities that need to be completed first, like the person has to look for an item at the warehouse, they have to bring it to wherever they package your orders, and then complete many other different things. So even this could be sort of widened into another process. So one key takeaway from this slide is that processes are everywhere. And if you look around yourself, you could probably also find a few examples there. Now, if we talk a bit more specifically about what process is by definition, as you can see here, it says that it's a chain of events, activities, and decisions. And if you think back to my example of coming to the University of Tartu, there were a few activities there, like me taking courses, like me writing my bachelor's thesis. There was also an event when I received my bachelor's diploma, and there even was a decision that crossed the decision that I had to make of whether going for a job or for a master's program. A business process also involves a number of actors and objects by definition. And as you can see on the example of this diagram, the actors here could be some human resources, like, for example, the person packing your order, and objects could be your order that the person is packaging. And then a business process is also triggered by a need, and it leads to an outcome that is of value to a customer. And this means that if you think back, for example, to this restaurant process, a need there is, well, customer being hungry and arriving at the restaurant. And then the outcome that is of value to this customer would be that they receive their meal and hopefully they enjoy it and they leave the restaurant not hungry anymore. So this is a basic definition of what a process is. And you saw also some simple graphical representations of them. And then the question becomes, what do companies do with these business processes? Because companies, like I mentioned before, a restaurant or an online shop, or even a university like University of Tartu, they have many different processes. And first of all, it's good if they are aware of that they have many different processes. And what they do with them, well, ideally, they would have to manage these business processes so that they bring value to the company, like, for example, reducing costs where possible, and also improving experience of customers that are involved in these business processes. And how companies do this managing of business processes, there is a discipline that studies this, and there is a discipline which tells how to do this business process management. The discipline is called, well, business process management, as you can see on this slide. I put here a figure of a cover of a book, which gives a very good intro to business process management discipline. And I highly recommend it to you if you think that this could be of interest to you. An interesting thing about this book is that it's the first author of the book is the professor at the University of Tartu, who also teaches this course here. Just saying. And so this discipline of business process management, it basically tells you which principles and methods and tools could be used to manage business processes and bring some value to the organization. As you can see by definition, it's a body of principles, methods, and tools to analyze, execute, and monitor business processes with the aim of improving their performance. And what this means in a more graphical representation is there is this business process management lifecycle. This lifecycle basically consists of a few phases which tell you how exactly you could manage your business process. So it starts with process identification, as you can see on the slide. And in process identification, what we do is we try to understand which processes we have in our organization. So if we think back to the restaurant, this one example that I gave you about a customer coming to eat there is only one example of a process that can be there. There can be many other examples, like, for example, ordering groceries that would come to the restaurant so you could be able to prepare food in the first place. And then process of, I don't know, managing cooks and hiring them. All these different things that constitute an organization, they could be seen as processes. So at first we have to identify what processes exist in the organization. And if we take as an example this serving the customer, again, now we know that we have this process and then we have to discover it. And here you have this example of a sequential model, that examples I was also showing you before, like at the restaurant, at an online shop, or even my journey to the University of Tartu. So we have to first understand what this one process looks like. So this serving customers, how does it look like? For that, we have to sometimes look at different documentation or talk to different people and conduct workshops in order to be able to even put these little rectangles on the white sheet of paper and to understand what comes after what, and maybe some steps are repeating and stuff like that. So this is what we do in process discovery step. And then after we know what our process looks like, we need to analyze it and we need to find some weaknesses and their impact, their possible impact on the process. So this is where actually the meat of this whole discipline comes in, and why business process management is important. Because if we know that there is this one process of serving a client and we know that, well, there is this positive outcome, like a happy client, which is not hungry anymore, but we also can find out that there are some weaknesses in this process. Like, for example, if we know that this process can be long, like it takes, say, 40 minutes just to bring this meal from the kitchen to the customer. So we know that it takes a long time, but we don't know why. So this is something that we do in the process analysis step. And this is where we conduct different quantitative and qualitative analysis steps to understand where the weaknesses lie and how to solve them. So one example could be that it takes such a long time for the meal to arrive to the customer because we don't have groceries in the kitchen for whatever reason. It could be that there is a lack of training in the cooks and they have to walk around and ask how to make some specific type of sushi or stuff like that. So when we analyze our process for inefficiencies, we can also estimate what impacts they have and then after that, we can think of some solutions. So this is something that comes in the process redesign step. As you can see on the examples on this slide, we had here some sequential model and then some new activities here were added. So in this example of a restaurant, maybe we could add additional training to the cooks so that they don't have to spend so much time on walking around and asking about recipes. And then we have to implement this change. So this ideally doesn't stay on paper and we actually go out to our kitchen and provide some training to our cooks. And then after that, we can monitor how this changed our process, hopefully to the better. And then we can control that things continue being in the same way. And as you can see also, this figure is in a circle, so it doesn't really have an end. And this also has a meaning behind it. And what I mean by this is that business processes have to be managed all the time, basically. Because if we just removed this inefficiency of a cook who wasn't trained enough, it can also appear that it repeats itself for some reason in the future, or there can be some other inefficiency which we hadn't identified before. It can come up later. So in order for the organization to be successful and optimize their processes, they have to engage in this activity of business process management all the time. And now I'd like to give you an example of how this could look like. And I will give you this example with the help of Anna, who is a process analyst at an ABC bank. And what Anna does at this ABC bank is, well, her title is a process analyst. So basically, she has to do all those activities that I just described to you in the BPM lifecycle. And she works in particular with this one specific kind of process, which is a loan application process. This is when, you know, customers apply for a loan, for example, for a car. And from the perspective of a bank, it consists of many different steps. And as an example that I brought on this slide is the 3 steps. When a bank receives the customer's application, they have to assess it first. They have to check credit history of the customer, and then they have to check their income sources. And what Anna does is that she looks at this process and she knows that there are these basic process performance measures like time, cost, and quality. And so she has to try to look at this process and see how she can improve it, basically. Perhaps there is a long time between assessing application and checking credit history. Or perhaps it takes a lot of resources to check the credit history, or there are many errors done in some of these steps. So with regards to these different process performance measures, she has to look for improvements and see how she could basically improve and optimize this process in her bank. And in this particular example, after conducting some analysis steps, like I described to you in the life cycle, Anna realized that there could be a possibility to redesign this process in such a way. What this means is that, well, basically before it was very sequential and credit history was checked after assessing application, and then income sources were checked after checking credit history. And she realized that with the resources that they have at the bank, there is a possibility to do these things in parallel. So instead of having to do the sequential, which maybe increases time, she proposes that these things, credit history and income sources, are being checked in parallel. And perhaps they have resources like loan specialists to do that. So this is what she does, essentially. She looks at the process, she looks for some inefficiencies, and then she proposes improvements to it. And she does this all following this business process management lifecycle. And when she does that, she actually has to do quite many activities, like I already had mentioned to you before. So she can't just draw this model of a loan application on a whiteboard just from her head. I mean, she can, of course, but then probably it will be quite inaccurate. But in order to draw it accurately, she would have to probably talk to loan specialists. She would have to read the documentation of some rules in the bank of how they assess these loan applications. And only then she can continue with representing the process and trying to analyze it and look for how to improve it. And as you can imagine, doing all these things can be quite draining. But this is what happens when Anna does this all by hand, so manually. She conducts all these steps like identification, analysis, redesign. This is all done by her hands and her brain. And then she finds out that there is apparently such thing called process mining. What this looks to her like is that basically all these steps that I had just mentioned to you are eliminated. And what she now has to do is just launch some tool, and then it does some magic to her. So she knows that there is this field called business process management in blue that I had just been telling you about. Then she heard there is the possibility to mine data. And then apparently in the intersection, there is something called process mining. And it looks like magic at the beginning. And there's probably a bit of magic involved, but this actually has quite good explanation. And so process mining, basically what it can help Anna with is to analyze the processes in a much more efficient way, first of all. And second, it can show her the reality behind these processes. So this example of the model that I showed you before, where we know 3 steps like assessing application and credit history and all those other things, this is what Anna knows because she read that in documentation and because loan specialists told her that. But this is, well, based on what people tell her and based on what she reads elsewhere. But what it is actually like in reality, only the data can tell. And the data is actually present in majority of organizations, in majority of information systems that organizations use. And this is where process mining comes in handy, because process mining can work with actual data from actual information systems. And if we talk about this bank example, the loan specialists don't do these things on paper, hopefully. Probably somewhere they do, but in Estonia, definitely not. And they record, well, they don't record, they do some things in their information systems, and information systems can be something like ERP, for example. And they do some steps to this loan application, like checking credit history, for example. And these steps are recorded for them in these information systems. And then this data, which is called event log, can be used for process mining, which is represented on the slide. So we have an information system in the organization, it produces event logs, and then process mining algorithms use that, and then some insights can be generated based on it. So this is kind of a shortcut in the field, in this life cycle of business process management, where which is not just a shortcut, but it can tell you actually the basic reality behind the processes. Now, an event log is this data that is recorded by information systems, and it can look something like this. So again, coming back to this example of a bank, we have here a case, which is called C001, and a case in this example would be a loan. So we know that a person applied for a loan, and it is labeled in this system as C001. And from event log, we actually can know what has happened to this application from its very beginning, from its very existence in the system. So we can know, for example, for sure that on the 18th of October 2016, a resource, so a loan specialist called Sue, completed an activity check completeness on this loan application. Now, if we were talking again about Anna doing all of this manually, it could have been that Sue would even forget to tell her that she did this step. And then it's possible that this step could even be completely omitted on the model, just because Anna didn't have any source to prove this and she just couldn't represent it on the model. Then some information would be lost. But the advantage of event log is that we know for sure that this thing happened in the system. And so we can work with what for sure had happened before. So the data that is used in process mining is called an event log. Looks like this. And as I told you previously, process mining algorithms, there's abundance of them by now. They use this event log as the basis to arrive at different kinds of insights. For the purpose of this presentation, I will skip talking about different process mining algorithms because it's quite technical, first of all, and second, it would take not even a separate webinar, but a separate course. But we can just imagine that there are different algorithms which can do different things, about which I will tell you about and the value that they can bring. So these things that we can find out using process mining on the basis of an event log could be a process model. So this representation of a process that I was showing you before with rectangles and arrows, but this time it's an actual representation of what had happened to the process. Another thing that process mining can show us on the basis of event log is performance dashboards. So what would have to be calculated manually or maybe on some data that is recorded in some reports or somewhere, it can be calculated as well based on the event log. So we can know for sure how long it takes for one activity to be completed or how long it takes before credit history was checked and then the next activity started. Another thing that we can find out with process mining is so-called conformance reports. And this is in particular interesting to such people like Anna who imagine their process to be in this way. But then when they use process mining to mine this model and then they compare them, they find out that the reality, in fact, is very different. So this is what conformance reports can tell us based on the event log. Then some root causes can be also found out to these problems. So the step of analysis that I was telling you about in the life cycle. And another interesting thing, which is quite recent, is that we can even predict what can happen in the process in the future based on some historical data. So using machine learning algorithms and some magic, it can tell you what is going to happen in the process if it continues running in the same way, for example. I will show you a few examples of what it can look like based on the event log. So a process model could look something like this. So in reality, a person could probably draw something similar, but without all of these different arrows, because I don't imagine that this would be possible to find out through interviews or workshops. But when mining a process model from an event log, you can in fact find out that from this activity, so after informing user, something goes into repair, but then it comes back almost all the time. Maybe you hadn't even know about this, but now you can know this thanks to the process model. And these process models, although they are based on event logs, are again quite simplified because they're based on synthetic logs. But if we actually talk about an event log from an actual organization, like if we were actually to take an event log, for example, from University of Tartu, and then mine it, we would see something like this. And this is the reality that process analysts like Anna face every day when they use process mining, because as I told you before, what people imagine to be quite simple and sequential turns out to be a complete spaghetti. And this is actually called the spaghetti model in the field. Another thing was the performance dashboards that I mentioned to you, and it could look something like this. This is everything you can get just based on the event log. You can find out that, or you could think, for example, that your loan takes a week because that's what your loan specialist told you. But then when you actually mine your data, you realize that on average, it can take 3 weeks, and sometimes it even takes 4 months. And you probably could have even missed that because you never looked at it into close. It is just a bunch of other graphs, which are some very specific KPIs, but basically to give you an idea, you can see the actual performance of your process based on the event log that your information systems record. I would like to give you also an example of actual applying of process mining actually in reality. So here at the bottom, you can see the source. I took it from this website, which is an official website of process mining as a field. There you can find quite many different case studies of how it is actually applied in reality, and you can find them from different industries. So if you're interested, I really recommend checking it out. Today, I decided to focus on this simple example in a town hall of a city in Spain. So what we know is that, and this is real, I reiterate, so this actually had happened in reality. So this town hall in Granada, in a city in Spain, they knew that they had a problem with one process in their town hall, and in particular, it was a process about collecting complaints from people who live in Granada. So people who live in Granada, they receive, at some point, they receive these text declarations. And if they see that there are some inconsistencies in there, or they don't agree with something, they can file a complaint to the town hall, and then the town hall has to respond to this complaint. To this complaint. So a project was to look into this process of resolving these complaints about taxes. And the team that was working on this project, they contacted the Granada City Council, and then they asked for data that is available in their information systems. What they received was something like this. Now, what I showed you before in the table of an event log, that is an event log in perfect reality and on slides, of course. But when we talk about reality, people who ever worked with data, they know that it takes the longest time just to clean and prepare the data to be able to see that event log that I had showed you before. So they received a bunch of data which had to be cleaned and transformed into an event log. And then after they had done that, and they put their data into one of the process mining tools that is able to take event log as a data, and all of them can, I mean, one of the process mining tools, they mined a process model, which looked something like this. Now, we don't have to understand everything that's written there, but just to explain to you, they basically saw this process model. They knew that there are some activities that happen in this model, And these arrows represent basically steps between activities. What it means is that if, for example, this activity was completed before this one started, it took some certain amount of time for whatever reason. And so after they looked at this process model, they realized that all these arrows are quite comparable, in fact, except for this one thick red one. And so they asked themselves what that could mean. And then when they looked closer into the model, of course, in process mining tools, there are possibilities to filter the models and look at some specific events or departments or specific cases. So after they looked into it closer, they realized that one of the departments in this process that is responsible for responding to these tax complaints is called a Department of Appeals and Claims. And it takes them sometimes on average 24 weeks to register a claim. Now, when the project team looked at this, they thought to themselves that, well, 24 weeks to register a claim is definitely very long. So this is probably the core problem of why it takes so long to respond to these claims. And then when they conducted some other analysis, they used this, in particular, this chart, which is called the dotted chart. We don't need to read this dotted chart. I just wanted to show you the different possibilities of what you can do. And basically what they realized from this is that for some reason, there are sometimes pauses, like large pauses. All these different dots here represent different events that happened. And then sometimes there were like huge gaps without any events. So then they thought to themselves, has anything happened there? Maybe the process completely stops for some reason for a few months. Why does that happen? So after they started digging for root causes, they realized that there were a few problems connected with this. And how they realized that is through actually talking to the employees who work with this process. So I mentioned to you before that sometimes you need to talk to some people to even be able to plot a process model. But sometimes, like in this case, this was everything that the data could tell them. They couldn't find out anything more about data, including what could be the root cause for this problem. So they had to talk to the employees and interview them to find out what had happened. And then after that, they actually realized what had happened were a number of things, like, for example, in this registration of complaints, there was a lot of manual reentry of data. There was a lot of manually forwarding complaints from one department to another. And the weirdest thing was that when some person was on vacation, no other person could take over their jobs. And so this created this huge gap in working with complaints. So the project team recommended a few suggestions based on what they had found in the data and after talking to the people, which was avoiding manual reentry of data, which was automatical transfer of claims between departments, and having other people being able to do some things when some people are away or on vacation. And judging by the reported list of this case study, this has helped them a lot. This is what they did in representation of a model. So if you remember in the life cycle, I was telling you that there is a model as is. So what we know the model is like of the process, and then there is a model to be. So what will happen after the redesign of the system, or in this case, the redesign of a process of complaints. So this was a short example of how process mining actually can bring value with actual data in actual organizations. And as I mentioned, there are quite many interesting case studies there. So if you want, I recommend reading about them. Now, one last thing I wanted to tell you about today is a little bit about what University of Tartu does in process mining research, because the title of my presentation was Applying and Researching Process Mining. And as Anna also mentioned at the beginning, I'm a PhD student in process mining. So I am a part of a lab here at the University of Tartu, which is called Business Process Management Research Group. And also, if you can recall this Fundamentals of Business Process Management book that I had mentioned and the first author of it, Marlon Dumas leads this Business Process Management Research Group. So he's basically the leader of our group. And then we have a few PhD students, a few professors who work on different fields of process mining. And what we do is basically a lot of things that are related to what I told you about today. I think one of the most interesting ones being what is called predictive process monitoring, something that I also briefly mentioned when you have historical data and you can predict what will happen in your ongoing cases. So if we talk about this Granada City Council that I was just telling you about, for example, predictive process monitoring could tell that, for example, this one specific case, and based on the predictions, it will run out of time. Meaning, if a Granada Council has some deadline in their organization to, for example, respond to a complaint in 14 days, and then based on some machine learning algorithms, predictive process monitoring would be able to tell, based on analyzing these cases, that, for example, the specific case will run out of time. And one thing that goes even beyond predictive process monitoring is called prescriptive process monitoring. And this is also machine learning algorithms being able to tell what to do in such cases if it is predicted that something negative will happen in the process. So like if this complaint, the response to a complaint will run out of time in 14 days, then, for example, do this, and this will help you to avoid that problem. What I do is visualizations for this field of prescriptive process monitoring. So basically here we're talking about, or I was just telling you about, machine learning algorithms that are able to do that. But we also need to think about how to present such things to end users, actually. So to give you an example here on the slide, we could have a problem. We could have a process at the car repair shop, for example, where mechanics take cars and then will fix some things with those cars. And then prescriptive process monitoring could tell you, based again on historical data, that one repair will take too long, and it would suggest to, for example, apply a mechanic to some specific task, because based on the analysis, this will help you solve the problem. So what I do is try to think about how to represent these recommendations to people who are working with this process, and how to represent them in a better way than this gray rectangle here, which I just put for visual purposes on the slide. So, so this is briefly what happens in our research group and in my field of study, but I unfortunately cannot tell you more. So if you want to learn more, follow me on Google Scholar. Yes, so one last thing that I wanted to tell you, or to show you rather, are some useful links. As Anna mentioned at the beginning, the webinar is recorded, and perhaps even these slides will be shared with you. So if you are interested in this topic, I highly recommend visiting some of these resources. Some of them are completely free, including this business process course at the University of Tartu by Marlon Dumas. This course is in open access and it's available on YouTube. And it's also available along with the business process management course at ITM master's program at the University of Tartu. So, so think about it. Now, these are the sources that I've used, and thank you very much. This will be the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Kateryna, for your presentation. It was very interesting and very well explained, I would say. So even I understood your topic really well. Thank you so much. I guess it's time to open our Q&A session. Katya, you can stop sharing your screen.
Yes.
And let's check the questions that we have received. Our first question would be, can you name any real examples of these companies managing business processes?
Yes, so I believe what this question refers to is whether some companies actually do what I was just telling you, like Granada City Council did, for example. Yes, by now there are many. Even if you Google this, you can read about many interesting case studies, as I mentioned. There is the big companies that can come to my mind at first are, for example, Zalando, which is a big clothing retailer in Europe. They use this to optimize their processes of delivery of these clothes to homes and whatever else. There are quite many supermarkets, or like supermarkets, and also physical retail. So not online shops, but like physical retails in Europe who do this, especially in Germany, because Germany is quite advanced in process mining, I would say. or companies in Germany rather. And yeah, and so many different retailers use that in Germany as well. If you look for case studies, you can even find some from universities. Like there are some universities in Australia which try to optimize their admissions processes, for example. So yeah, there are quite many. This is a relatively new field, but not so new that no one does this yet. This actually brings quite a bit of value to quite a bit of companies around the world.
Thank you. Let's move to the next question. Why did you decide to do your PhD in Tartu? Are you planning to stay here after graduation?
This is a great question. So why I decided on my PhD in Tartu, I think the main reason was because I already was involved in some research in process mining in my master's. So I did my master's thesis also on process mining. And I kind of knew quite for a long time, I kind of knew that I would like to do a PhD. I didn't really have a specific idea in my mind, but I liked what I was doing in my master's. And then I received an offer from my supervisors. They were like, do you want to stay? I was like, sure. I mean, I like University of Tartu. I really, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was an ambassador for 2 years, and I think I continue being an ambassador and probably will throughout my entire life, to be honest, and like for good reasons. So yeah, I really like the university. I like the environment. Our research group is one of the strongest research group in this field. So yeah, I think many different factors which just fell into place, and it happened like that.
Mm-hmm. Are you planning to stay here after your graduation?
That is something yet to be determined. My graduation is quite a bit, still quite a bit of time away, so we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, let's check next question. What about privacy-aware processes? Have you faced situation of process mining where user privacy is a requirement? How to deal with those scenarios?
This is also a very great question, and this is a very big topic, in fact, in process mining research. This is an issue in quite many processes, especially if we talk about healthcare. So, for example, when you're at a hospital and you're working with, if you're working with analyzing processes which involve actual people and knowing about their diseases and stuff like that, this is all very sensitive information. And because of that, there is a field within process mining, which is called privacy preserving process mining technologies, basically. And at the University of Tartu, we even also researched this. Recently, a PhD project was completed, and even this PhD project already contains many different techniques which could be usable already. And there are other people who work on this as well. And I know that some commercial process mining vendors, so actually these tools which you can download and use yourself, they also already work on including these in their functionality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Let's take next this question. Do you do any programming? I believe there are some fields of programming like constraint programming, if I'm not mistaken, that have an approach different from the typical imperative path to solve that type of problems.
So I personally do not do any programming. I am focused more on user side of process mining, so creating interfaces and doing qualitative research with users. But this is also, well, programming is involved in many different fields within process mining. I mentioned in my presentation that there are many algorithms of process mining, for example, that can do many different things. And one of the, most important thing is discovery. So like taking an event log and discovering a model from it, for example. And there is an algorithm which was created many, many years ago by pioneers in the field, but I mean, it works and everything, but it was created many years ago, and it's not like it stopped there. People are still working and applying, as you mentioned, all these different programming techniques and different approaches, and they are applying them sometimes even to the same problems, to look at them from different perspective and to be able to come up with something that is more efficient, perhaps, or more fast or something like that. So I believe even if you Google just this combination of things that you're particularly interested in, I think you could find something. If not, you can come and research it.
Thank you. Let's take next question, this one. How do you know the exact process model to use in a given solution? Do one have to go ahead with process mining rather than modeling the solution?
Yeah, so a process model is mined on the basis of the event log. So if there is this event log or data, in other words, that we have in our information systems, when we apply process mining, I would say when we even take this data and then we take some vendor, so like some commercial process mining solution, like for example, Apromore, which was developed in cooperation with the University of Tartu. And when you upload this data there, the tool uses algorithms to present this process model to you. So this is an automatic way to do that. If we talk about what I was telling you in the part about business process management, in order to model it by hand, you can do such things like workshops or talking to people and try to just imagine in your head how this goes and actually try to model it and then confirm it with people that this is actually what happens. And for example, in this business process management course in ITM program, we do quite many of these things. So quite often we are presented with a case, for example, and we have to read about this admissions process at the university. And then based on that data, we try to like bring it into this graphical representation. And yeah, that just happens like that, I would say.
Thank you so much. Let's take our last question because we are running out of time. So let's take this one. What was the most useful course that you took during your master's that is the most beneficial for you now, today?
Well, that is a good question. Let me think. I think that actually business process management was one of the most useful. Definitely, I don't know if the most, there were many, but one of the most beneficial for me today. Well, because given my field of research, and without it, I wouldn't basically know anything about processes and then what to do with them. Yeah, I would say this is also one of the courses which is one of the most applicable to current world and working in business, if you may, especially if you're interested in such jobs as business analyst, or like trying to improve the organization where you're working. So yeah, I would say that was one of the most beneficial for me. And another one I would say was also software product management, which teaches the basics of product management and is, from what our students tell us, is also quite a good start if you want to start a career as a product manager. And also because I'm a teaching assistant there now, so if you come to study ITM, we will see each other.
Thank you very much. I promised last question, but we received one last question. What are your advices for students now in the last semester of our master's degree, our thesis semester?
Well, advice number one is to write your thesis, because I know that if you want to graduate from master's, there is no way around it. So, I mean, you have to write it. So this is advice number one. Advice number two, if this relates to whether you're thinking of going for a job or maybe joining a PhD program, I would say trying, first of all, to understand what actually interests you. And for that, maybe talking to other people who have been in, for example, jobs or research fields that interest you, and try to find out whether that actually helps. I think that would be it. And I think that was pretty much what I was also doing in my last semester. I was writing my thesis and thinking about my future, and then thinking basically whether this process mining research, which I was doing back then, which is something for me. It's not an easy decision, but that's where it led me. So I'm quite satisfied with it, I guess.
Thank you so much, Kateryna, for answering the questions,
Sure.
for your wonderful talk. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you are interested to apply to Master's Program Innovation and Technology Management, the application process is already going on, and you can submit your application before March 15. So don't forget to submit your application in time. If you have any questions regarding the program, then we are going to host virtual meetings with program directors. and we are going to send you more information about it and the follow-up email, which we are going to send together with the recording of this webinar. I guess we have to wrap up our webinar right now. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, thanks also from my side, and thank you for your questions.